podcast. I'm your host, Mari Reesberg. Over the past several years, I've combined my degrees in acting and somatic psychology to share my sustaining creativity techniques with performers. And now I've decided to share it with a bigger audience that includes you. I believe we are all creative, and this podcast is all about that. I'll be interviewing people from all backgrounds, ages, and creativity experiences to share just how creative we all are. Today, I'll be chatting with Milan Martin, founder and CEO of the Free Spirits Company. Please enjoy Milan Martin. Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. Today, I'm here with Milan Martin, founder and CEO of the Free Spirits Company. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on. These are fun.
I'm excited to chat with you and learn a little bit more about all the things you do. But before we get there, why don't you let our listeners know a little bit more about who you are and what it is you do?
I'm a recovering advertising guy. I spent about 20 some odd years in the advertising business. It was a business I chose with zeal. I wanted to be in that business. I loved that business. I still do. It's a flawed business, but it was a really wonderful thing for me. I grew up in a small town outside of Philadelphia, which was kind of provincial. You didn't have a very global view of things, and moving to New York, working in the advertising world, living abroad, traveling the world just opened me up to be the person I've become, which I'm really grateful for. And and the downside, obviously, with advertising is it's a work hard, drink harder business. And I embraced every bit of it. Like I said, on one hand, it's a really wonderful creative business that puts you with some of the most dynamic, interesting, creative, intelligent people in the world. On the other hand, it's, at least for me and in the circles I traveled, alcohol was the red thread, right? It was like, okay, clients are upset. We got to take them out for a boozy dinner. Our employees are really burnt out. We got to throw a party with a lot of booze. We couldn't crack the big idea, boozy lunch, and all of those things that I think ultimately, the aha for me, at least, was it wasn't necessarily the alcohol I was after. I loved the ceremony of going out to a great place with friends or colleagues. And when your glass is empty and somebody's like, "Hey, Milan, hey, Mari, you want another round?" You go, "Yeah, of course I do." Because the alternative of, I don't know, back then it was like drinking water or cranberry juice. That sucked. So, I think we all just kind of kept on drinking. I think for most of us, the phenomenon of that leads to, well, you drank a lot of alcohol last night when that wasn't necessarily the intention.
Yeah.
So at the tail end of my advertising career, I was running an agency here in the West Coast. And I'm like, all right, well, we can do another 20 years of that, or I can take kind of this magical superpower that the advertising business has kind of, taught me, which I kind of, it's a business that teaches you how to use creativity in really powerful ways. It teaches you that it is not this God-given amorphous, superpower. Like I say, it actually is something that can be learned and used. And so,
Yeah.
I kind of set my sights on doing my own thing. I was wanting to have my own brand, and kind of all the winds, blew in the direction of CPG business. And I think in the advertising business, you go, all right, what's the most absurd idea I can come up with? And at the time, the most absurd thing I could think of was non-alcoholic bourbon, non-alcoholic tequila. It elicited something from people. Some people were like, "That's a really good idea," and some people were like, "Dude, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life."
Yeah.
And when you get those kind of reactions, you're like, "Oh, maybe we're onto something here."
Yeah, I love it. And that's kind of how the Free Spirits Company came to be. And tell us a little bit more about what that is and how you go about doing that?
Starting it. Yeah, it's interesting because, I think a lot of people believe anybody who starts a business starts it in a way that is characterized by jumping off a cliff, right? There's that moment
Mm-hmm.
where you're, oh, I'm gonna jump, I'm gonna do it. And for me, that wasn't the case. For me, it was a series of baby steps that um ultimately, let me test the waters, let me kind of go dip my toes in. And, I'm like, all right, here's the idea. That's interesting. Non-alcoholic spirits. What would a name be? Okay, we got a name. What would that stuff taste like? All right, we played around in the kitchen. Oh, why don't we find a formulator, a commercial beverage company that can maybe help us bring it to life? Great, did that. And it was just one of those things where, after a few months of just those baby steps, you're kind of walking into the ocean little by little, your ankles, your, calves, your knees.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden you look back to shore and you go, oh, Jesus, I'm way out here.
Yeah.
I didn't realize had gone this far. And at that point, you're like, well, all right, I guess I'm in this thing. And, I guess
Mhm.
we're doing this thing. And so, I think for me, it was just, testing it out, pushing it. And I think having the ability and the luxury of being able to do that. My wife, who's a great partner of mine, has always kept a job, and so I see her as a partner in the business.
Mhm.
She's provided healthcare and an income while I've kind of been off doing this weird, wacky non-alcoholic spirits thing that's
Mhm.
turned into something. But early days, we didn't know. So
Yeah.
there's always risk despite that kind of baby steps thing, because
Mhm.
at some point there is that, okay, if we're going to do this thing, here's what it means, and here's what we're going to put
Yeah.
in business and all of that.
That makes sense. Well, with as much creativity as you have flexed in your life, what does it mean to you to be creative?
You know, I think people oftentimes confuse creativity with art,
Hmm.
right? And creativity, in my opinion, or at least how I deploy it, is critical thinking that helps solve a problem.
Hmm.
Uh, and if I can add, solves a problem in a way that's additive to the world. I think the idea of art is one thing, and that's wonderful, and to be a fine artist, and that's wildly important to our world. But it's just different, right?
Hmm.
It's not, when you're talking about, creativity of how do we solve a problem. In our case, it's really shifting the ability for somebody to go, well, I oftentimes drink too much, but I love drinking cocktails. I love going out. Our whole thing is, no, go do the things you love without compromise, and now
Hmm.
you get to do them without the downsides, right? Because it was always stealing from Peter to pay Paul. It's like, I'm going out on a big Friday night, but I'm going to pay for it tomorrow.
Hmm.
And our vision is just more, oh, do more of the things that you love. you know Cocktails are awesome. Going out and having big energetic nights is awesome. um we just kind of happen to believe that, all of the effort and money that's been spent over the past, 100 years by big alcohol, convincing us that, you know, in order to have a good time, in order to mourn, to, rage, to do all the things, alcohol
Hmm.
needs to be the star player. We're kind of like, no, you know what? Maybe not. And the reality is that we're not, sober. We're not a sober brand. I'm
Hmm.
not sober. This is much more about moderation.
Hmm.
Is anything else. 95% of the people that buy our stuff still drink alcohol.
Hmm.
And so, this is much more of an inclusive play for those who, want to drink, and live the way they do, but they're just tired of the downsides of the hangovers and the ill
Hmm.
effects alcohol and relationships and all of those things that too much alcohol brings, you know.
Hmm. Absolutely. I'm curious because there is somewhat of a mocktail culture
Sure.
out there. What kind of sets your non-alcoholic liqueurs or spirits out, like separate from if you wanted to get a mocktail? It help me help me understand that.
It's a totally fair question because in the scheme of things, there's a lot to learn in the category.
Yeah.
And well, it's funny when I say non-alcoholic tequila to somebody who doesn't yet understand the category, their first response is, "Wait, what's the point of that? The point of tequila is to get drunk, right?" And then to
Mm-hmm.
scratch the surface a little bit, you go, "All right, well, think about cocktail culture, right? If it was just about getting drunk, you know, we would just be kind of putting alcohol in our bodies in the most efficient way.
Right.
Cocktails are delicious. There's the craft and all of the
Mm-hmm.
that goes into cocktails. That's why we pay $20 for a cocktail. Like, imagine, think about this. We
Yeah.
pay 50, 20, $25 for a cocktail. It's 3 ounces of liquid. Why is that okay? Versus, you might be going to the mall this weekend, or I might be going to the store this weekend and see a pair of jeans you like, and they might cost $150. And you're like, well, I'm not spending $150 on a pair of jeans. The pair of jeans will last you 10 years.
Yeah.
So why are we happy to pay $100 for a barbell? And my opinion is that it ultimately is it's because the experience of a cocktail is great. You're like, oh man, I'm gonna get, a Boulevardier, right? And I'm
Mm.
gonna with that particular bourbon from Kentucky, and it's
Mm-hmm.
mixed up with these bitters that is from this, little craft maker in Northern California, and it's mixed up by this guy with a crazy mohawk who's won this competition, and I'm in this beautiful cocktail bar, and right.
Yeah.
And so you're like, all right, yeah, $15, sure, take my money, it sounds great. And so, for us, it was just like, well, all of that's rad, let's just kind of make alcohol optional. And then to your question about mocktails, I think as the categories evolve, mocktails have been around forever.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, and they're kind of making a comeback, Shirley Temples were the thing,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And effectively, what a mocktail is just a combination of juices
Mm-hmm.
that, and then are poured in a more fancy glass and maybe has a garnish on it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very sweet.
Mm.
And a cocktail, is all about balance, right? A great cocktail. Think about a margarita, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's all about balancing, excuse me, it's balancing the sweet with the umami, with, the tart and the bitter. And it's this amazing amalgam of an experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we kind of go, all right, there's mocktails. The next level up is a zero proof cocktail, which is a cocktail that you know and love, like a margarita or a Manhattan or a Boulevardier or a Negroni, just made with non-alcoholic spirits like
Mm-hmm.
ours, instead of just a bunch of juices that try to, mimic it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, with our stuff, it's really low calorie, and it's infused with vitamin B12.
Mm.
So I always just kind of wanted to have a product that said, all right, this thing that you do that we know has kind of negative health consequences associated with it,
Sure.
that was actually a positive thing.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Okay. I appreciate the differences between mocktails and the cocktail world and experience. And I mean, starting in this kind of, it sounds relatively new to people, the alcohol-free spirits. What kind of challenges did you come up against? And then how did you have to navigate them? Maybe some of the more creative challenges in getting that balance right that you're talking about.
Oh man. You know, when we talk to our customers, people that are in the category, people get it.
Hmm.
But it's a category that you don't get until you get it. Meaning, somebody will go, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And you're like, or people will say, well, that's not for me because I'm not an alcoholic. I wouldn't drink non-alcoholic spirits.
Hmm.
And you go, actually, it's not for alcoholics, explicitly not for alcoholics. It's for people who maybe do drink, but want to drink more cocktails, but have less of the downside.
Mhm.
And people say, oh, that makes sense, I guess. Or it's like, well, what if you are, out at a bar and you've had two cocktails and you want to drive home, or you have two cocktails or three cocktails and you want to have a run in the morning and you don't want to feel like crap,
Mhm.
or you've had a cocktail and you're with a client and the client's going crazy with cocktails and you're going to keep drinking, but you're going to drink non-alc so you can stay sharp. And then you kind of offer up a couple of those kind of things and people
Mhm.
go, oh yeah, no, I would do that. I would do that. Right. And
Mhm.
so, there's an education, piece of it that's really important. But I will say, there are still so many people I talk to, and like the category is growing at 100%
Yeah.
year. Like it is overall the larger no and low alcohol categories coming up on $20 billion.
Mhm.
So it's a big global change in culture.
Mhm.
Um, but there's still plenty of people that haven't been exposed to it.
Yeah.
And, one of the most persistent comments we get online from those people is, that drinking free spirits is like hiring a hooker for a hug.
Ah, fair.
And, you know,
Okay.
and we've always had kind of a, because I think it's a funny comment. We've always had kind of a quippy little reply to it. But in the context of, creativity as a little jujitsu,
Mhm.
we actually went out a couple of months ago and we hired a professional sex worker to
Mhm.
go around the city giving people free hugs and handing out our cocktails.
Mm.
And it was a really wonderful thing. We filmed it and it became a really wonderful activation.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
One that was done with kind of, inclusiveness and empathy to all people, and, a yes attitude of, oh, maybe you're right. Maybe it is like hiring a quote unquote hooker for a hug. And all these people got really wonderful hugs. And it brought up the topic of like, oh, did you know that loneliness is a problem and people are hiring people for professional hugs and yada, yada, yada. And so, I think that that's just, one of those examples of how, it's like the world of yes and,
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
an important one, right? You kind of like go, oh, that's interesting. I know you meant it as a dig, but sure, let's run with that.
Yeah. No, I love taking a seemingly negative dig or comment and turning it into something quite positive and very effective in getting a message across as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Well, when you think of kind of your life and creativity, what's your earliest memory of being creative?
What's interesting about that is as much love as I have for the advertising world, it is a world of haves and have nots relative to
Mhm.
creativity. So, there are people in that business that are literally called creatives,
Yeah.
and there are people called account people, account managers, and there's people called strategists and finance people and all that. And so for the first 15 years of my career, I was kind of on the other side of it. I was
Mm.
a strategy person, I was an account management person, I was a business person. And the notion there is there's a special floor that frankly is a nicer floor than anybody else has,
Yeah.
um, where the creative people sit, because
Oh.
these are people that were born with this god-given right of creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I never saw myself as a creative person.
Mm-hmm.
I think I did creative things over the course of my career. I've always played in bands and things like that, but I definitely didn't see myself as being creative. And it wasn't until, much later in my career where I started seeing the patterns of what creativity was. You know,
Mm-hmm.
how to, what are the ways of thinking? What are, I think as you get older, you have a broad enough view of life and of
Yeah.
things like, oh, I see that. That's a number two, right? You can use that notion as, as something to solve a problem over and over and over again with a bit of a different spin on it each time.
Mhm.
So, I'm not somebody that I don't believe anybody would have said like, oh, he's a really creative guy from birth. It's just more having been surrounded by it forever, kind of quietly aspiring to be like it, just because that group of people were more interesting and allowed to be a little bit
Mhm.
weirder. Um,
Yeah.
and, and then all of a sudden you're like, I felt like, in fact, we just started a creative agency
Mm.
for free spirits,
Mm-hmm.
and we named it Imposter because, I feel, like the quintessential imposter syndrome of,
Yeah.
I write all of our ads, I kind of come up with a lot of the ideas that we do that in my previous life would have been the responsibility of the creative department. And
Mm-hmm.
as in my role in the advertising world, if you tried to throw a creative idea in there, people would have gone like, dude, just stay in your lane. Stay in, right.
Right.
It's almost like
Yeah.
it's like the drummer in a rock and roll band's like, I wrote a song, and everybody's like, uh-huh, sounds good.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, that makes sense. And I think it defeats the purpose of creativity, right?
Totally.
Creativity can come from anywhere, from anyone. Doesn't matter what title you have or how old you are. And
Yeah, I
even,
think that and I do think the broader culture is more accepting of that, right? It's like, especially over the past 20 years, as technology and even the creator culture has opened up the snobbery or the exclusivity around creativity. I think has evaporated a bit, right? There was this
Mhm.
creative class of people at one
Yeah.
point, like in advertising. These days, I mean, a really simple example is, I don't know, I know plenty of people that wouldn't be considered creative, but they have iMovie on their Mac. They know how to edit a film. They know how to
Sure.
get, it's just all those tools that we didn't have access to, where kind of the democratization of it. Whereas to
Hmm.
edit, a little video 30 years ago was like, well, you had to have an editor and an Avid suite and somebody that went to school for that. And it was,
Right.
all of these assets you had to have. And now you're like, no, I have an iPhone and a Mac. So I make movies.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, in your life and your career and job, who or what inspires you to keep going or to flex your creative self?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of, in an experience like this is my first time founding a business.
Hmm.
And it's by far been the most wonderful, you know, and at times the most awful
Yeah,
thing
that
I've
makes
ever
sense.
done, right? The high highs and the low lows. And I've always been somebody that has kind of compared myself to others. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not a good thing. I think that I've kind of found that at least for me personally, it's, I heard a really wonderful expression a couple of years ago. Said, don't compare your insides to other people's outsides,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we don't know what other people are thinking or feeling or dealing with, or all of
Yeah.
that. Look how wonderful that is, and I wish I could be that. And so,
Hmm.
to say, I think that in life, it's kind of you against you, right? You're going to be your biggest fan. You're going to be your biggest, critic. And I certainly look out into the world and see so many inspirational stories of creativity and commerce and business and things like that, that people who have started businesses or come up with really wonderful creative ideas, in Hollywood or and I think there's no shortage of seeing those stories every day just through social media, and I get
Hmm.
inspired by that for sure. um but I think in the short term, the day to day, it's really just a lot of it sounds like super new agey, but it's a lot of like positive self-talk of, you know, trying to keep yourself on the sunny side of the road. When you're in a dark place, you're like, I'm identifying that I'm in a dark place. I can pick myself and put myself in a different place. And
Hmm.
so, all that to say, there's no shortage of inspiration out there. But I think the most important thing for me has been more of, like they say, it's like you live 98% of your life in your head. Make it a nice place to live.
Yeah, exactly. That makes so much sense. Yeah, and for people who kind of are struggling with that, maybe they don't see themselves as creatives, or they've been told, stay in your lane. That's not the creative lane. You're the accountant, or you do something else for the business. How would you encourage them to find creativity in their life?
I think that a blank piece of paper is a really powerful thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always turned to I've got literally a stack of white 8.5 by 11 paper held together by one of those crappy alligator clips,
Mm-hmm.
and a bunch of Sharpies. And ultimately, I think starting with a blank, the scariness of a blank piece of paper, a lot of people kind of shy away from that, right?
Yeah.
Accomplish something, the blank piece of paper is really scary. But I've found that the blank piece of paper fills up with thinking and ideas when you make space for yourself
Mm-hmm.
to think about the thing you're trying to solve or the thing you're trying to do, and you're capturing your thoughts. um, you blink your eyes and 20 minutes goes by and 10 pages are filled up with scribbles and notes and ideas,
Mm-hmm.
maybe half of which never go anywhere. But I
Yeah.
think ultimately, the road to creativity is not a single step. What I've found is it's like, you've ever been out on a hike, man. There's like one of those like babbling brooks with like the rocks you need to kind of cross. You take one step and then another and another and another, and all of a sudden you're, kind of out in, the middle of the stream. And so
Mhm.
I think ultimately it's similar to the baby steps out into the ocean or the whatever, where, you know, just capture an idea or two.
Mm.
And after half an hour, if you don't have the big idea, that's okay, because there's a bunch of things that your brain's going to do over the next 24 hours that's going to process it. Wake up the
Yeah.
next day, make another 30 minutes of space for it. So all that to say, I would say that there probably isn't a single person on earth that doesn't have the ability to think creatively.
Hmm.
Like, people kind of predetermine their destiny by saying, well, I'm not a creative person, I'm not even going to try, I'm not going to make space for it, I don't
Right.
know how to do it, right?
Hmm.
And I think it's as simple as that, right? It's as simple as, know that you can
Hmm.
make, no, nobody ever came up with a great creative idea by doom scrolling through Instagram, right?
True
uh,
story. Yeah. Yeah.
so give yourself the space for it, capture your ideas, be kind to yourself, knowing that everything you write down is not going to be brilliant, but
Hmm.
there are little baby steps to get you to somewhere else.
Nice. I love that reminder. It's very helpful. And the, the road to creativity doesn't happen in a single step, that it is that process and experience. So, oh my gosh, it's been such a treat to chat with you. I have one last question.
Sure.
What does it feel like in your body to be creative?
I've never been asked that before. It's a really interesting question. um I think, and maybe this is too cynical of an answer, but I think after a while you start to expect to see the results of your creativity out in the world.
Mm.
Like, I remember when I was a kid in the business, when a TV spot would come on, I'd be out at a bar with my friends, and the spot would come on and be like, yeah, oh my God, this is my TV spot. I made this spot, or I did this spot, or I went and got the coffee for the guy that made that spot, or, whatever those things were.
Hmm.
Um, I think that, what's a really kind of wonderful outcome, now that I think about it, of a life characterized by creativity, is you can kind of look out into the world and see your impact on it, and to
Hmm.
feel that comfort of you know your presence here on this, rock, like, was,
Hmm.
uh, is, whether it's all meaningful or not, but you kind of go, that's pretty neat that, I'll be here for however many years. And I get I get to make a positive impact in the world that kind of lasts beyond, to your question, beyond my body, right? Beyond me.
Yeah.
And it's something that is really important. I've got 2 children. My wife works in a creative business as well. We both talk to our children about, making that kind of a positive impact on the world, and you're using your creative abilities to do that.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. If people want to learn more about what you've got out in the world, how could they go about doing that?
All the usual places. Go to, Instagram. We're at Drink Free Spirits. Our website is drinkfreespirits.com. And you can find us pretty easily on the Googles.
The Google's excellent. All right. Well, thank you again for taking the time to chat with me. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Me too, Mari. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. We'd love to keep in touch, so follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We are at Sustaining Creativity. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tag your friends and family so they can listen too. We love to hear from you, so leave your reviews, comments, and questions. Check out our website, sustainingcreativity.com, for upcoming offerings and creativity coaching. Tune in Tuesdays for our next episode. And remember, with creativity, anything's possible.